everyone. My name is Gracie Amini Balentos, and today we're going to delve into a fascinating period in Philippine literature, the years under American rule. This era saw a shift in language, themes, and style, reflecting the changing landscape of the nation. This topic explores Philippine literature during the American colonial period in 1898 to 1945. We'll see how the historical context, the rise of English and American education impacted Filipino writers and their work. Get ready to discover how literature became a powerful tool for expressing national identity, resistance, and cultural pride during this time of change. So let's proceed. On June 12, 1898, the raised the Philippine flag as a symbol of our independence. So General Emilio Aguinaldo was selected as the first president of the Philippines Republic, but this was short-lived. Okay, so on June 12, 1898, the Filipinos had just won their fight against the Spain, right? And they were celebrating their newfound freedom. They raised their flag, the Philippine flag, high in the air, a symbol of their independence. It it was a huge moment for them, a moment they'd been fighting for years, and lead this new nation. They chose General Emilio Aguinaldo to be their first president. He was a respected leader, and everyone was hopeful for the future. But as we know, things don't always go as planned. This independence didn't last long. The American came in, and that's when things took a turn. So even though the Filipinos had just won their freedom, they were about to face a new challenge. So let's proceed to the next bullet. The Filipino-American was resulted in defeat after General Miguel Malvar surrendered. He was the last Filipino general to surrender. Many Filipinos started writing again, and the nationalism of the Filipinos remained undaunted. Filipino writers went into all form of literature like news reporting, poetry, stories, plays, essays, and novels. Their writing clearly depicted their love for the country and their longing for independence. And 1910. So, after a long and difficult war, things didn't go the way the Filipinos hoped. They lost the war against the Americans, and General Miguel Malvar surrendered, the last Filipino general to do so. It was a tough time for them. But despite this setback, the Filipino spirit remained unbroken. They are unbothered that time. The war, instead of extinguishing their nationalistic fervor, actually fueled it. Filipinos began to pour their feelings of love for their country and their longing for independence into their writing. They turned to literature as a powerful means of expressing the pain, their hopes, and their defiance. Grabe jud ka, fighter ang Filipinos during that time. So in 1910, let me read the PowerPoint first. A new group started to write in English. Hence, Spanish, Tagalog, the vernacular, and finally English were the mediums used in literature during these times. The writers in Spanish were wont to write on nationalism like honoring Rizal and the other heroes. The writers in Tagalog continued their lamentation on the condition of the country and their attempt to arouse love for one's native tongue. The writer in English imitated the themes and methods of the American. Okay, so by 1910, things were changing in the literary world. A new group of writers started using English na, which was becoming more popular because of American influence. So now you had Filipinos writing in Spanish. Tagalog, the regional languages, and English. The writers who stuck with Spanish were still focused on celebrating their heroes like Rizal and keeping the spirit of nationalism alive. The Tagalog writers continue also to write about the problems in their country and to encourage people to be proud of their language. But the English writers were doing something different. They started to copy the style and topics of American writers, trying to adapt to this new influence. It was a time of adapting and experimenting as Filipino writers explored different ways to express themselves. In 1920, the UP College Folio was later replaced by the Philippine Collegian. Did Star by Paz Marquez Benitez stand out as a model of perfection and character delineation, local color, plot, and message. So by 1920, things were getting more organized in the literary world. The UP College Folio, a literary magazine, was replaced by the Philippine Collegian, which became a bigger deal. And during this time, a really important story was published, The Deed Stars by Paz Marquez Benitez. It was a big hit because it was so well written. The characters were really believable. It had a great sense of place. The story was interesting and it had a powerful message. It's considered a classic of Filipino literature. Now let's proceed to the Philippine literature during the American rule was influenced by two factors. So here are the two factors. First is the education with the Americans providing free education. Many were given the chance to study, and English was the used as the language of instruction. Second is early literary works in English showed styles of which is American. It can also be seen that writers who just started learning English cannot fully showcase their talents because of the lack of mastery and of the language. Okay, so let's discuss. So Filipino literature during the American period was shaped by two big things: education and the American influence. First, the American introduced free education, which meant more Filipino could go to school. But the catch was that they thought in English, so they use English as a language of instruction. So Filipinos are started getting used to using it. This lead to some interesting result in writing. Early Filipino writers in English often copied American style because they were still learning the language. They weren't quite able to express themselves fully yet. It was like they were still finding their voice in English. Now let's proceed to the literary highlights. Writers during the American period drew ideas from the propaganda movement and the revolutionary movement to encourage the Filipino to continue to fight against the US colonialism. The demand for independence was supported by a campaign to make the Americans aware of the Filipino culture. Some writers who used the Spanish language began to shift to the American language for the fact that a larger population can now comprehend the said language. So, during the American period, Filipino writers were still inspired by the fight for independence, just like during the Spanish time. They were used their writing to encourage people to keep fighting against the American colonialism. They also wanted to show the Americans what Filipino culture was all about, hoping they'd understand and support the desire for freedom. And some writers even started using English instead of Spanish because more people could understand it. It was a time of change, but the desire for independence and strong sense of national pride remained at the heart of Filipino literature. Even though they were under a new colonial power, Filipino writers continued to use their word to express their identity and fight for their future. So that's all for my part, and my group mates will continue the discussion. Thank you.
Good day, sir. Good day, everyone. I am Jane L. Idpan, and I'll be discussing the English writer and literature during the reorientation period, together with Miss Hannah Baylon. But before we delve into our discussion, let me read first the objectives of the lesson. So at the end of the lesson, the students will be able to understand the historical context, identify key literary figures, and analyze early literary work. Period of reorientation from 1898 to 1910. The period of reorientation covered the early years of American period and the landing of the Americans to Philippine shores, including the Philippine-American War. Even during the war, the Americans established public school system in areas that have been pacified English language as a literary vehicle occupation in August 13, 1898. So the period of reorientation was a time of transition for the Philippines under American colonization. So this period marked significant cultural, educational, and literary changes as Filipinos adjusted to a new colonial system. So during this period was the time nga ang Philippines is under sa American colonization. On August 13, 1898, niabot ang mga Americans during the Spanish-American War. So despite sa ongoing conflict between two countries, the Americans introduced a public school system sa mga areas na kontrolado nila. Then mausab ni ang most significant contributions of the American colonial period nga ang education sa mga Pilipino is accessible, which is help spread literacy. Also, this period was introduced as English was the medium of instruction in schools and became the primary language of government and education. Then, diri sad nga time ang sinugdanan sa English as literary vehicle, meaning ang mga writers are started using English in their works instead of Spanish or native language. So by 1910, English came to be used as a medium of instruction into public schools, and the first English teacher were the American soldiers stationed in various areas. Later on, the professional teachers arrived via U.S. Army transport ship or USS Thomas, hence these pioneering were called Thomasites. So by 1910, English had become the primary medium of instruction in Philippine public school system, like what I've said earlier. So the American soldier as the first teacher. So when the American established a public school system diri sa Pilipinas, ang ilahang first English teacher is not a professional educator, but American soldier nga naka-assign dito sa mga various areas nga kontrolado nila. So they began teaching English to Filipinos as part of the U.S. government's efforts to introduce American culture and education. So next is the arrival of the Thomasites. So to improve the education quality, the professional American teachers were later sent to the Philippines. So ang first teacher biya sa mga Filipino no kay American soldier, dili sila professional teacher. So during the arrival of the Thomasites, para ma-improve ang educational quality sa mga Amerikano sa pagtudlo sa ilang mga cultures and literacy, nag-send sila og mga American teachers dito sa Pilipinas. So these teachers traveled abroad the USS Thomas, a U.S. Army transport ship in 1901. Because of the ship's name, these pioneering educators were called Thomasites. Next is by May 1908, the primary and intermediate grades were using English It was also about this time with the forerunner in the use of English in higher education was founded. So in May 1908, English had become the primary language used in both primary and intermediate grades in Philippine public schools. So this progress or this reflected the progress of the American government in terms of the educational system sa Pilipinas. So naa siya progress, both na siya primary and intermediate grades in Philippine public schools. So during this same period, the foundation for higher education in English was also laid with the establishment of the University of the Philippines or UP. So UP was founded on June 18, 1908 and became a key institution for higher education in the country. It was among the first universities to use English as the medium of instruction, setting the standards for academic excellence and English language proficiency in higher education. Next is the EL-113 became the most famous Spanish-language Filipino newspaper, which was brilliantly written but obsessed with the micropolitics of the period. So, El-113 was a prominent Spanish-language Filipino newspaper during the American colonial period. Its name, which means the Renaissance, reflected its goal of revitalizing Filipino nationalism and intellectual discourse. So, the El-113 is famous and intellectual. El-113 gained fame for its exceptional writing, which showcased the skills of its editors and contributors, many of whom were among the most brilliant Filipino writers and intellectuals of this time. It is also focused on political issues, so the newspaper became known for its critical stance of the political events of the period. It was deeply engaged in the micropolitics of the time, meaning it focused on detailed, often localized political issues, including corruption, abuses of power. And lastly, the Filipino Free Press, founded by R. Makulov Deck and D. Theo Rogers, was the first privately owned publication to publish English works of Filipino writers. They paid the Filipino writers when their work was chosen to be published. Established in the early 1900s, the Philippine Free Press was the first privately owned publication in the Philippines that encouraged and supported Filipino writers in English. It provided a platform for Filipinos to express themselves in the English language, which was still relatively new as a medium for literary and journalistic work. The Free Press became significant because it not only published English works by Filipino writers, but also paid them for their contributions. This practice was groundbreaking as it gave value to Filipino literary talent and motivated writers to improve their craft. In summary, the Philippine Free Press was instrumental in promoting and supporting Filipino writers in English, helping them gain visibility and compensation for their work while contributing to the development of Philippine literature in the colonial period. So that would be all. And Miss Hannah Baylon will further discuss the lesson. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Hannah Baylon, and I'm going to discuss my assigned topic in the lesson. This is the continuation of the reorientation period. So the first slide we have, the Dominicans are believed to have established the first printing press in the Philippines in 1953. In the same year, the Doctrina Christiana y Lengua Española y Tagala, the first book to be printed in the Philippines, was produced. This is from the first edition published in 1960. Marcelo H. Del Pilar, explanatory note. Marcelo H. del Pilar is the most famous journalist in our history and is also considered as the father of Philippine journalism. In this statement, it says that the Dominicans established the first printing press in the Philippines in 1953, producing the Doctrina Cristiana y Lengua Española y Tagala with Marcelo H. del Pilar, a prominent journalist considered as the father of Philippine journalism, providing an explanatory note in the first edition published in 1900s. So, next slide. There are three pioneer Filipino English writers. First one, we have Justo Juliano, who wrote Sorsum Corda as the first literary work published in English in 1907. Justo Juliano wrote Sorsum Corda in 1907, making it the first literary work by a Filipino published in English. Next slide, we have Juan F. Salazar, who wrote My Mother and Air Castles, which were published in 1909 Rocero. Juan F. Salazar authored My Mother and Air Castles, both on which were published in 1909. These works contributed to the development of Filipino literature written in English during the early 20th century. And lastly, we have Sebastian, who wrote To My Lady in Lawag, which was published in 1909, period of imitation. This period was characterized by the Filipino writers imitating the American and English writers. The UP College, full U, the school publication of the University of the Philippines, published literary compositions in English written by the pioneers in English poetry, essays, and short story. Sebastian's To My Lady in Lawag was published in 1909, during a time when Filipino writers were heavily influenced by the American and English literary styles. This era, known as the period of imitation, saw the UP College full U at the University of the Philippines published numerous English literary compositions, marking the pioneers in English poetry, essays, and short stories. And the last slide, we had legacy of the period of reorientation laid the foundation for the development of Filipino English literature, paving the way for future generations of writers. The legacy of reorientation set the stage for the future growth of Filipino English literature, paving the way for future Filipino writers. This period introduced English as a writing tool and encouraged generations to be creative and innovative in this bilingual tradition. And that's all. Thank you for listening to my assigned topic, and I hope that you have learned something from me. Once again, good morning.
Good evening, everyone. So I will be discussing the English writers and literature during the period of imitation. So let's know who are the writers and their literature during the period of imitation. Let's also know why there is a word imitation during that time. So during this period, or the period of imitation, the Philippines is under the rule of Americans. So we Filipino, we are under the roof of American pala. So the public education was introduced and became accessible to many Filipino children. So dito pala nagsimula bakit may public education. So dito pala inintroduce, at ang nag-introduce nun ay ang mga Amerikano. So we are lucky enough that it was introduced by American ruler, because if it doesn't happen, I think we can't access education because we don't have enough money. Only the rich people can afford to go and to access education. So in this time then, more school were established and English was used as a medium of instruction. So since public education was introduced by American, and the American, their language is English, so of course the medium of instruction, the language used is English language. So, period of imitation is about 1910 and 1924. So, this period was characterized by Filipino writers imitating the American English writers. So, dito pala nangyari bakit may imitation na naganap, because the Filipino writers during this time was imitating the American writers also. So, the UP College Folio, the school publication of University of the Philippines, published literary compositions in English written pioneers, in English poetry, essays, and short stories. So the UP College, sila yung nag-publish ng mga literature or ng mga literary composition of English written pioneers, and it could be poetry, essay, or short story. The UP Folio College, they are the one who publish that literature. So the period of poets, so these are the poets or the writers during the period of imitation, and they are the poets. These are some of the poets writer during the period of imitation. The first one is Fernando Maramag, wrote The Rural Maid. Juan F. Salazar, Jose M. Fernandez, Vicente Del Fierro, Francesco Tunugbanwa, Maximo Calao, Vidal Itan, Francisco Africa, and Victoriano Yamson. So, in period of imitation of writers naman, in essay, there are two categories, the informal and formal essay. So, the pioneers in formal essay was Carlos P. Romulo, George C. Bacobo, Mauro Mendez, Vicente Hilario, and informal essay pioneers or writers naman, these are the pioneers or the writers of informal essay: Ignacio Manlapas, Godofredo Rivera, Federico Mangahas, Francisco B. Icasiano, Salvador P. Lopez, and Jose Lansang, and Amado G. Dairet. So, the period of imitation of short story, these are the short story that was written during the period of imitation. So, the Philippine Herald, the Philippine Review, the Independent, the Rising Philippines, and the Citizen. So, there are lots of writers during the period of imitation, and my co-teacher will be discuss who are the writers who have impact or notable works during the period of imitation. She will going rather to discuss about the achievements, the award that was given to that writers during the period of imitation. They are awarded because they have a notable works, means it is very significant during that time. That would be all. Thank you.
Hello everyone! Welcome to my video discussion on Philippines literature in English, focusing in the period of self-discovery. By the way, my name is Janice Batiansala Turtoga from BSED English 3B. This presentation is part of our course EL-113, which is Survey of Philippines Literature in English. I find this topic deeply inspiring because it reflects the Filipino journey of understanding identity amidst change. By the end of this video, I hope you will gain a deeper understanding of the context, themes, and significance of the works written during this period. We'll explore the authors, their works, and how these pieces connect to our present-day experience. In this video, I will discuss the historical context, prominent authors, and significant themes that define this period. Let's begin with the importance of self-discovery in literature. So why self-discovery is important in literature? Self-discovery is a universal theme in literature because it invites us to journey alongside characters, reflect on their struggles, and explore our own identities. So this process depends our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. So now I will discuss the overview of the period of self. So the period of self is a notable era in Philippines literature. During this time, Filipino writers used literature as a platform to reflect on their identities and adapt to cultural changes brought by American colonial influence. This era highlights the tension between preserving traditional Filipino values and embracing new ideals introduced by Western culture. So the first author is Luis G. Tato's Manila, a collection of verse in 1926. It is one of the earliest collection of Filipino poetry in English. It provides a glimpse into urban life under American rule, exploring themes of identity, cultural adaptation, and self-discovery. For example, in one of his poems, Dato writes, "Manila, where dreams are born and broken, where laughter mingles with the cries of men." So this line reflects the duality of urban life, both its promises and its challenges. So the next author is Marcelino de Gracia Concepcion, The Bamboo Flute in 1932. So it is celebrated for its romantic and socially conscious poetry. His works were influenced by Western poets like Edgar Allan Poe, yet they remain deeply rooted in Filipino experiences. His poems explore themes longing love and culture and cultural identity. So through his works, Concepcion highlights the emotional and spiritual journey of the Filipino people during his transformative period. So the next author is Aurelio S. Alveros. So self-published collection Moon Shadow on the Water. So it is emphasizes themes of love, identity, and pride in Filipino culture. So his poems intertwine personal emotions with national pride, capturing the Filipino journey toward self-discovery and acceptance of their cultural heritage. So now let us proceed to the themes in Filipino literature of self-discovery. So Filipino literature during this period revolves around personal growth, identity, love, and longing, and national consciousness. So the writers reflected their own struggles in navigating the changes brought by colonization and cultural transitions. Next is the historical context and its impact on literature. So, the transition from Spanish to American colonial rule profoundly shaped Filipino literature. With the introduction of English as the medium of instruction, Filipino writers adapt Western literary styles while preserving their unique cultural expression. Next is post-colonial influence. Post-colonial influence and the tension between tradition and Western ideals create a fertile ground for exploring themes of identity and adaptation. So now let us proceed to the keywords of the period. So now let's analyze specific works that exemplify the themes and challenges of the period of self. So the first is Luis de Datos Manila, a collection of verse. So oh, yeah. Dato's poetry captured the complexities of urban life during the early 20th century under the American influence. So his work serves as a personal exploration and cultural critique of Manila's transformation. Next is Rafael Joluta da first Costa's first leaves. So, first leaves reflect themes of youth, nature, and the emotional impact of loss. So, it represents a coming of age story set against societal changes. So, the last is Manuel Argelos, How My Brother Leon Brought Home a Wife. So, this story portrays cultural adaptation through Maria, who adjusts to rural life in the Philippines. So it highlights the clash between lifestyle and traditional while showing how individuals grow through transitions. So it reflects how individuals grow through this cultural transition and gain a deeper understanding of self and community. So that was the end of my topic. I hope you've gained valuable insight into the period of self in Philippines literature. This era shows how literature reflects personal journeys and cultural identity. So as we reflect on these works, let's ask ourselves, how can we use the lesson of self-discovery in literature to navigate our own lives? So thank you for joining me.